first part of my talk tonight has been obviously about the health part. And I think you guys are probably a little bit different to most in that you are very, very well aware that so many of the things that we are being told about in this world of ours today are actually not true, that we are being misled. Well, the reasons why you wouldn't have heard this before, or why people haven't understood this before, is because we've been misled about the nature of the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, the news at the moment, you know, here in Britain, is all about whether Pfizer will buy AstraZeneca, you know, and what will be the effect upon our economy and everything. Well, actually, the effect upon the economy is everything that this is about. Because, you see, diseases are exploited by drug companies as markets. You know, when you get sick, you are a more valuable commodity to a drug company than you are when you're healthy. Drug companies are not really interested in you being healthy. There's no money, get this, there's no money in curing diseases. The real money in the drug industry is in giving people a pill they have to take day after day, week after week for the rest of their lives. That's how the drug industry makes money. There's no money in cures. And you think about the trillions of dollars that have been spent on research, you know, none of them are seeking a cure. They're seeking ways to control diseases, to keep customers. The human body is like a marketplace. The drug industry defines the human body as a marketplace and a potential source of profits. And what it wants is a monopoly on the practice of medicine. Natural approaches that cannot be patented, are no use to it. If you invent a synthetic chemical, a molecule that doesn't exist in nature, and you produce it as a drug, and especially if you're the first company to produce a drug for a specific disease, you essentially, for the period of time that that patent is in effect, you own that disease. You control that market. Albert Szent-Györgyi discovered vitamin C, but he couldn't patent it. He couldn't say he invented it. He just discovered it. Vitamin C exists in nature. Nobody invented it. It exists in nature. So the drug industry, in order to survive, has to eliminate any and all competition from natural, non-patentable therapies. And I know you've had people coming to you here talking about codex. Well, that's the reason why. It's the patent issue. The patency issue is the thing that's holding the pharma industry together. If ever anything happened to change that, if ever non-patentable molecules like vitamins were allowed to compete on an equal footing, the drug industry would be halfway towards being finished, especially if the information about natural alternative approaches was sufficiently widely available. It's not even, right? It's not even as if our government, the British government, doesn't know about the nature of the drug industry. It does. And in fact, about 10 years ago, the House of Commons Health Committee produced this report. And look at the title, The Influence of the Pharmaceutical Industry. This is a 126-page report. On the day that it was produced, it was news. It was covered. The day after, it was gone. It was buried. No more was heard about it. But when you read it, it makes fascinating reading. It confirms much of what I've been saying. It describes the influence of the drug industry as pervasive and persistent. It talks about drug safety concerns. It acknowledges that drug-induced illness is an increasing problem. That's diseases, health problems caused by drugs, needing more drugs to treat them, and so on. And it actually states there's not enough independent research being conducted to compare drug approaches with non-drug approaches. And in fact, some of the witnesses who took part in the inquiry stated openly that there's little commercial interest in non-drug approaches. The government understands the way the drug industry works. There'll be copies of this, if there's any MPs watching this film on YouTube, there'll be copies of this report in the House of Commons library, okay? Why has nothing been done about this? You know, a lot of time and money has been spent producing a report, but there's been, that I can see, there's next to little or no action been taken about it. And, you know, the power of the drug industry I mean, the drug industry is a $1 trillion a year industry. Its total global sales in drugs amount to $1 trillion a year. By 2017, total drug sales are expected to be worth $1.2 trillion. That's $1,200 billion. Okay? I mean, compare that, to put that into perspective, the GDP of Great Britain is, £1.5 trillion, this is dollars. But it's a huge... If the drug industry was a country, this will put it in perspective, if the drug industry was a country and the figure of $1 trillion was its GDP, it'd be about the 15th or 16th richest country in the world. So this is what it's about. But this also raises another question, doesn't it? Because if the drug industry is a $1 trillion a year industry, why does it need our money? Why do we have to give generously to medical charities collecting money for drug research? I mean, it's insane, isn't it? It's absolutely insane. And yet, good-hearted, honest people who give to such charities and work for such charities believe that they're doing the right thing. I'm not criticising them because they've been misled, the same as the rest of us have as well. There are signs that this analysis, this understanding of the drug industry is beginning to become the majority view. There was a survey released in February last year, and it found that most people feel the drug industry sees cancer as a money-making opportunity rather than as a disease to eradicate. And the best part about this study was sponsored by Lilly Oncology. Lilly Oncology is a division of the drug company Eli Lilly. And it polled more than 4,000 people in 6 countries. And 60% of the respondents said that they believe drug companies are more interested in treating cancer than curing it. So, I mean, 10, 15 years ago, when Dr. Art and our foundation first started saying these sorts of things, it was pretty shocking. Audiences back then were, you guys are sitting there and you get this straight away. It's a sign of how far we've come, really, that all of us understand the dangers to society when we allow multinational corporations to gain such a control over us and our governments. And this is a problem. I mean, globally, if you look at the economic impact of all this, I mean, it's absolutely, totally crazy. The World Economic Forum knows about this because they did a study a few years ago looking at the total global economic impact of just 5 chronic diseases. They looked at cancer, diabetes, mental illness, heart disease, and respiratory disease. And they found that over the next 20 years, the total global economic impact could reach $47 trillion. The total global economic impact of just 5 chronic diseases. I mean, let's face it, there's dozens of them. We can't afford this. I mean, this is insane that we are trying to encourage developing world countries like, in Africa to follow the insane example, with our extraordinary, expensive healthcare system. It's just insane. The economic cost of cancer alone we know it's about $1 trillion a year. The cost of heart disease economically to the world is not that far behind that. So, in this age, in the UK and Europe today of austerity, this is a very, very, very great and important time to actually take steps towards dismantling this approach. The European Union is, in Europe, at the heart of all of this. The European Union loves the drug industry. The European Union loves all huge multinational corporate cartel-type industries. And in April 2008, it announced a €2 billion scheme to what it said was to boost drug discovery and establish the EU as what it called the pharmacy of the world. I mean, that phrase was actually used at the press conference when they announced this. And ultimately what they want is to enable drug companies, like in America, to advertise directly to us through the media, in newspapers and magazines and television and the whole range of stuff, But at the same time, of course, as I'm sure many of you will be aware, they are trying to ban non-patentable vitamin therapies, or at least reduce them to near meaningless doses where there's no possible chance of a therapeutic effect, you know. So this is the picture, really. I mean, the second part of my talk, I'll be explaining more about the European Union, how it came about, and how it came that, you know, the multinational corporate cartels have such control over it. And in fact, the thing I'll be focusing most on in the second half are the origins of the EU, which Rob gave a little hint about before. And I promise you that I'll be telling you some things that you've never heard before. But for now, thank you very much. Okay, so I finished up in the first half talking a little bit about this thing they call the European Union. And in this part, the second half of my talk this evening, I'm going to be getting into a bit of politics and a bit of history, but they both relate, as you shall see, to medicine in a rather surprising kind of way. How did our foundation get into this? You know, sometimes we get people coming to us, depending on, you know, what it is they're interested in. But we do get some people coming to us and they say, well, you know, all that history and politics stuff, which I'm going to do next, is all fine. But, you know, you've got to stick to the science. The science is what will change the world. Well, actually, no. You know, for all sorts of reasons. One great reason is that politicians don't read medical journals unless they're doctors. And even if they are, most doctors are too busy. You know, if you've ever been near a doctor's surgery, you know, they're too busy treating patients to read medical journals. They've got no idea, most of them, what's going on, you know, in the latest research. And as I said before, it's not their own fault. So how did we get into what I'm going to say next? Well, what we got into this for was, as we gradually began to realise what we all now know, which is that the European Union is not what we were told it was supposed to be, we started to learn a bit of the stuff that we all, I guess, know a bit about now. But we decided that we wanted to try to verify certain things that kept coming up again and again. And Dr. Rath, being a scientist, of course, he takes a very analytical approach to all of this, and quite rightly so. You know, we're not into conspiracy theories. We're only into, in the science, you know, what we can prove in the studies. And what I'm going to say to you next, we had to prove this before we eventually, you know, produced a book about it. So what we did, how we began this process over 10 years ago now, we started a pretty exhaustive search of international archives around the world. And we ended up recovering copies of literally tens of thousands of historical documents. And what I have to say next begins with that. This is based upon what we found. The analysis that we now have of this thing, the European Union, you know, was the direct result of that. And the story I'm going to tell you in this half begins in the year 1941, at which point, obviously, the Second World War was 2 years old. And we now know that the Nazi regime was maintaining several official institutes, but with one purpose only. And it was to prepare the future political, economic, and the future economic and political shape of the world for a Nazi and IG Farben victory in World War II. I'll be talking quite a bit more about IG Farben as we get a bit further into this, but for now, all you need to know is that IG Farben was an industrial cartel, a chemical and pharmaceutical cartel. It had financed the rise of the Nazi Party, and as you shall see, it played a very, very important role in the perpetration of World War II. So one of these institutes that the Nazi regime was maintaining was something called the Central Research Institute for National Economic Order and Greater Sphere Economy. And this was based in Dresden, in Germany, and this man here, Arno Scholter, was the man who headed it. And in 1941, Arno Scholter summarised the Nazi IG Farben plans for a post-World War II Europe in a book. And we have a copy of this book in our foundation library. It's in the German language, and we have translations of it. But the important thing about this book is that the parallels between the Europe it describes and the European Union we have today are simply astonishing. I'm going to give 3 examples. There are many examples, but I'm going to give 3 examples. The first concept that is described in Scholter's blueprint that you'll recognise is the concept of the European Commission. Now, for any of you who don't know, the European Commission is the unelected executive body of Europe. The laws of Europe start out in the offices of the European Commission. It consists of 28 people, none of whom are elected. No one ever goes anywhere near a ballot box to vote for these people. But they are de facto the 28 most powerful people in Europe. And this concept of an unelected executive body ruling over Europe in this way is described intimately in Scholter's book. But not just that. The system of EU directives is also described in Scholter's book. And in fact, the word directives is actually used. That's the word that's used to describe the system of lawmaking they wanted to bring about in Europe after World War II. Examples, modern day examples of this are the Food Supplements Directive, which is now the law that controls supplements containing vitamins and minerals in Europe today. But the book also talks about something it calls a master agreement. And this was a law, an agreement, a text that was planned to govern any future changes that took place after the implementation of such a system. And this bears an uncanny resemblance, of course, to the Lisbon Treaty. The Lisbon Treaty, which was the treaty that was passed a few years ago, that was intended to govern the future of Europe for thousands of years to come. There's more, though, because one of the sets of documents that we recovered was from the Nuremberg war crimes trials that took place after the end of World War II. There were several trials after World War II that took place in Nuremberg, and the one that got all the attention was the first one. It was the one against the so-called the main war criminals. And after this trial had been completed, and these guys were mostly all hanged and things for their crimes, then there was a series of 12 other trials that took place, and these got as often as the case with the media, these got a lot less coverage, a lot less focus on these trials. But one of these trials was solely conducted against the managers and directors of this IG Farben cartel that I mentioned a few moments ago. And this man here was a senior director of IG Farben. His name was Fritz Ternier. This is a photograph of him in the dock at Nuremberg. And the interesting thing about Ternier's appearance at Nuremberg was that his legal counsel, a man called Dr. Berndt, specifically stated that the concept of what he called the total European economic area had shaped Ternier's aims, his client's aims. I mean, in a sense, he was sort of trying to make a flimsy defence for Ternier. He was sort of saying, well, yes, my client stands accused here of some terrible crimes, but his aims were honourable. His aims were to bring about the creation of this total European economic area. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Ternier was found guilty of plunder, spoliation, slavery and mass murder. I mean, it's hard to imagine any more serious, more heinous, war crimes. But he was sentenced to only 7 years in prison. And in fact, he was released after serving only 2 years I mean, it's incredible, slavery and mass murder alone have got to be worth, much more. But get this, in 1956, obviously fully aware that the man was a convicted war criminal, a Nazi war criminal, Bayer appointed him as chairman of its supervisory board. Bayer was one of the component companies of IG Farben. Essentially, to all intents and purposes, he got his old job back. And he went on to hold this post for another 8 years. Now, then we move on to Auschwitz, okay? And there's an important link between Auschwitz and Farben. But to get to that, we have to understand something that I think we've all been misled about. And it's this. If you've been to Auschwitz, I've been twice. If you've been to Auschwitz, you'll be very familiar with this. This is the sign over the gate, that greeted every inmate when he or she arrived there. And this states, it says, Arbeit macht frei. I mean, my German is terrible, but what it means is, it means work liberates you. Work frees you. And it's never been adequately explained why that was there. There's been all sorts of bizarre explanations given, but none of them get close to the truth. And the truth is to be found, as I've described, in Nuremberg. So the question is, what does this slogan, work frees you, what does it reveal about the true purpose of Auschwitz at its onset? Well, the Auschwitz concentration camp inmates were used as a source of slave labour by IG Farben. They were used as a source of slave labour at nearby industrial plants, like this one. This plant was IG Auschwitz, and this was a 100% owned subsidiary of IG Farben. The Nuremberg war crimes trial against Farben proved that Farben was responsible for the construction and the operation of this plant, and that it used Auschwitz inmates as a source of slave labour. They were marched up the road, it's a few kilometres up the road, every day and back. It was a huge site. It extended over 6,000 acres, and it was the largest industrial complex in the world at that time. The thing is, right, when you go to Auschwitz, this site, which is still there today, I mean, this is one of my photographs, it's not part of the official tour. You can go to Auschwitz and what they call Auschwitz II, which is Birkenau, another concentration camp. But they will not take you here. It's largely disused now, this site, but it's still there. And it's mentioned in the Nuremberg trial documents. But the most shocking part of the Nuremberg trial documents against Farben relate to the criminal medical experiments. Because you see, we've been told, haven't we, that the medical experiments conducted on concentration camp inmates were sort of conducted by, crazy, insane, perverted Nazis for their, perverted pleasure or something. This is the sort of message that history has given us thus far. Well, if you look at the documents from the Nuremberg war crimes trial, a very different picture begins to emerge. Because in actual fact, criminal medical experiments were conducted on the inmates of Auschwitz using patented pharmaceutical drugs and vaccines from the IG Farben companies. The inmates were used as guinea pigs to be experimented on with experimental drugs and experimental vaccines. And these deadly tests were conducted by Bayer employees, like this man, Helmut Vetter. And get this, the chemicals that were tested on inmates were used to develop the first generation of drugs that eventually became what we now call chemotherapy. So the origins of chemotherapy lie in the tests, the criminal medical tests conducted on the inmates of concentration camps, and they subsequently went on to produce billions of dollars of profit. Do you get an idea now why you haven't been told about this? Why this history has been denied to us? We eventually put all of the Nuremberg documents from the Farben trial online on this website. You can look at them all, and you can download them all for yourself as well as PDFs. We also have, there was a related trial that was called the Doctor's Trial that also has some stuff that relates to this. We've got all that now as well, and you can find it all on this website. We even know what some of these preparations were, some of these chemicals that were used to experiment by these companies on the inmates of Auschwitz. I mean, look at this one, you know, look at the name at the top. What does it say? Bear. You know, we've all seen awful pictures from Auschwitz. We're all at least dimly aware that experiments took place. But it's not been properly explained to us what was going on there. I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there weren't other, you know, awful, bizarre things going on that had nothing to do with this. But this part of the history, I am saying, we haven't been told about. And the proof is there. Go there and read it for yourself. This, when you go to Auschwitz, you know, this is this sign here in 3 languages tells you that this was the building where they conducted these criminal medical experiments. But it doesn't tell you what I'm telling you here. That part yet still is not part of the official story of Auschwitz. And yet the evidence is there, as I say. It's on this website, the original documents you can download. If you go to Auschwitz, and as I say, I've been twice now, and if you meet survivors, our foundation's been working with survivors of Auschwitz for over 10 years now. And it's one of the most moving experiences, you know, you could ever have, I guess. Because it will be bad enough just knowing the things and seeing the things that we've been told about Auschwitz. But when you go there, and especially as we know and have talked to survivors, and you gain this understanding, you know, to say it takes your breath away, the extent to which we've been misled, is still not doing it justice, really. But there's more, you see. There's more, because there are things that the European Union doesn't want you to know about even the man who was its first president. This man was Walter Hallstein. He was the first president of the European Commission, and he held that post between 1958 and 1967. You see, before and during World War II, Hallstein was a member of official Nazi organisations. The Association of National Socialist German Lawyers was founded in 1933, just after the Nazis had seized power. But in 1936, this organisation was converted to the notorious Nazi Association of Law Protectors, and membership of this organisation was restricted to those lawyers. Hallstein was a lawyer, by the way. Restricted to those lawyers who showed uncompromising support and participation in Nazi ideology. And Hallstein was a member of both of these organisations. How do we know that? Well, we know that because we have a copy of a memorandum sent by Hallstein to the representative of the Nazi government at the University of Rostock in Germany in 1935. So we have it in his own words that he was a member of these 2 organisations. But there's more. The thing that tells us the most about Hallstein and his ideology is a speech he gave shortly before the outbreak of World War II. He gave this speech in Rostock, at this building here, which is still a landmark today. This building is still there in Rostock. But the content of this speech, which I'm going to briefly summarise next, I promise you will change your ideas about the European Union forever. A key aspect of this speech was what Hallstein described as the link-up, a very disingenuous phrase, the link-up of Austria with large parts of what used to be known as Czechoslovakia and Germany. And Hallstein described the seizing of these countries as being, and I quote, part of the creation of the Greater German Reich and the legal Germanization of the new territories. So Hallstein was using legal language to say that Germany had a legal right to expand or to link up with those countries. And get this, he specifically stated that the failure to create what he described as a unified legal system for Greater Germany, as he described it, was one of the unfinished tasks and failures of the Second German Reich. The Second German Reich covered that period through the end of the 19th century up to the end of the First World War. So what he was saying was that the failure of Germany, as you know, at the end of World War II, to create a unified legal system for the area that it was trying to take over and control, or link up with, in his language, this was one of the greatest unfinished tasks and failures of the Second German Reich. But there's more. Because he described the legal process, the intended legal process for the creation of this unified legal system as being the issuing of directives. There's that word again, directives. So this was 1939. 2 years later, Arno Scholter included the same system, that same word in his book. Remember I showed you that just before. But get this, he also described the creation of the Greater German Reich as being an economic event. An economic event, he said, of sheer, unimaginable consequences. So to Hallstein, the creation of this Greater German Reich was a legal thing, but it was an economic thing, which was essentially what Fritz Tamir's lawyer, Dr. Berndt, said at Nuremberg. But the most shocking thing of all that Hallstein described in this speech was when he stated that one of the most important laws to be introduced in the annexed, the invaded countries, was the law for the protection of the German blood and the German honour. In other words, he advocated the introduction, the imposition, in fact, of the Nuremberg racial laws on the annexed countries. Now, these laws, of course, were the laws that excluded German Jews from Reich citizenship. They prohibited the German Jews from marrying or even having sexual relations with Germans or people of German-related blood. So when we say in our book that Hallstein was a racist, a fascist, these are why we say these things. This was the ideology of this man. How do we know he said these things? Well, we have a copy of the entire manuscript, his handwritten manuscript for this speech, containing the title and every word that he spoke. But that's not all. We have a copy of a newspaper article published the following day, confirming the venue of the speech, the dates of the speech also. And it describes how the attendees at this speech included the entire elite of the Nazi state in that region, Rostock. We also have a copy of the official invitation to the event, confirming the title of the speech, the date of the speech, the venue of the speech. So we have multiple evidence that Hallstein gave this speech and said these things. This was the ideology of the first president of the European Commission. One of the founding, if not the founding father of the European Union, who is celebrated today for that. So we have to ask ourselves at this point, how did a man like this come to sign the Treaties of Rome? The Treaties of Rome were signed in 1957, and these are the documents that gave birth to the European Union as we now know it today. How could a man with that ideology come to be sitting there with his pen poised to change the future of Europe with one stroke of his pen? I mean, I put it to you, that the logical conclusion is that this could only happen if the people, or rather the companies, who would most benefit from it, wanted it to be so. There is no other conclusion. It is unthinkable that Hallstein could possibly be sitting there only 12 years after the end of World War II, having participated in Nazi organisations and having the ideology that he had. It's unthinkable that nobody could possibly be aware of that. But there's more, you see, because it turns out that the cartel, the companies of IG Farben, were the economic driving force behind both world wars, not just World War II. This plan is older than any of us have been led to believe. During World War I, the companies that came to make up IG Farben already controlled over 1,000 patents. And this was the largest number of patents controlled by any corporate group at that time. Some examples, and some pretty shocking examples of that. In 1910, 4 years before the outbreak of World War I, BASF, the chemical company, took out a patent on the technology that enabled the making of bombs from air, bombs from nitrogen. This was the man who invented this. It involved the use of the nitrogen molecule. So 4 years before World War I took place, Germany already had technology to produce bombs from air. And this was provided for them by BASF. The other, of course, feature in World War I, was the fact that this was the first war in which chemical warfare agents were introduced. And these were, to all intents and purposes, the first weapons of mass destruction used in a war. Well, the patent owners of mustard gas and other chemical warfare agents were Bayer. Here's a really interesting thing. 6 weeks after the outbreak of World War I, the Chancellor of Germany's office produced its war goals, its war aims. And this was something it called the September Programme. Listen to this. It said, our goal is to enforce a Central European Economic Union. That phrase again. With joint custom regulations that includes France, Belgium, Holland, Denmark, Austria-Hungary, Poland, and potentially Italy, Sweden, and Norway. This union, it said, under German leadership, has to stabilise the economic dominance of Germany over Central Europe. And this was September 1914. You see, this plan for a European Union, a European economic union with Germany at its centre, is a century old. So the EU, or the Brussels EU, as we refer to it in our book, is actually the third attempt by multinational cartel at world takeover. Then as now, they have no intention of stopping at the dominance of Europe, at the control of Europe under this system. In fact, the blueprint, the EU blueprint, is already being copied and exported to other parts of the world. The African Union, for example, already has an African Union Commission. The African Union Commissioners, of course, are unelected. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which describes itself as an economic trade group, has already stated its intention to use aspects of the European model in its future development. The European Union is the model, and the European Union is actively encouraging and assisting these regions in following along this same plan. So what can we do? This is the question, this is the key question. And, you know, as we sit here in Britain today, We're already aware that a great many people already know enough about this construct, this Brussels EU construct, that they've heard enough and they want to leave. We know this. If we're lucky, we might get a referendum on it here. But I wouldn't hold your breath, because the people who most benefit from this will stop at almost nothing to ensure that we don't get a vote. I'm sure most of us already understand this. But the first step in affecting positive change in any of the areas I've been talking about tonight, the area of health, bringing truth to politics and history, the first step is to realise that we've been misled many times in the past. Some people never manage to take that step, and in the area of health, the inability to accept the fact that your doctor might be wrong can cost you your life. I mean, we all know this. I'm going to talk a little bit in a few moments about this concept we call health illiteracy. I talked with one or two of you about it in the interval. But taking that step to understand that we are actively being misled in so many areas of our lives is the most important thing that we can do. It's about bringing about the change in our thinking. And for those people who are not able to do that, for those people who say, well, yes, you know, if this was true, I would certainly by now have been reading about it in my newspaper. Well, you know, not yet. And if you intend to wait until your doctor offers these therapies, or rather the national health services around Europe and the world offer these therapies I was talking about earlier to you, you may wait a very, very long time. In fact, you may die first before this happens, unless we collectively do something about it. I mentioned earlier that our foundation has done quite a bit of work with survivors of Auschwitz, and I said before and I repeat again, these are amongst the most remarkable people you could ever hope to meet. I mean, I guess you'd have to be. To survive something like that, you would have to be made up of some pretty remarkable character attributes. And we've had several meetings and conferences that we've held and attended with these people. And in 2007, they proposed something that they called a Europe for the people, by the people. And this is essentially sort of a framework constitution for Europe, if you like, but it puts at its foremost goals the rights to health, the rights to life, the rights to natural healthy food, to clean water, a safe environment, putting people before profit, putting people before multinational corporations, because these people have seen the very, very worst that multinational corporations are capable of. And they can already, if you talk to them, they will tell you they can already see some of the same mistakes that were made back then being repeated again today. So you can sign this petition, because that's what it is. But it fulfills a goal, because in signing this and telling other people about it, you are in the process educating other people about this. And what this is about, I mean, this petition lives on this website of ours. I thought you might like that. Our EU referendum website. Because you see, we're led to believe that we live in a democracy, you know, and wars are being conducted now, you know, with the goal of bringing democracy to the rest of the world at the barrel of a gun. Well, you know, as Mark Twain famously said, if voting, and by that he meant the system that we have, because it's been in for a long time, if voting made any difference, they wouldn't let us do it. You know, getting one vote, right, getting one vote every 4 or 5 years is not democracy, it's an illusion. We don't control anything. In Switzerland, they have a system which is not perfect, but it's better, whereby when the government produces a law, the citizens have a certain time period within which, if they can get a sufficient number of signatures, they can challenge that law and force the government back to the drawing board. And the reverse is true in Switzerland as well. People, if they get enough signatures, they can propose a law and force the Swiss government to consider it. It's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than what we have right now, whether you're talking about the national level or the European level. And that's why Mark Twain said this, you see. We're living under this illusion that our one vote changes stuff. It doesn't. In fact, as everyone recognises, the three main parties here in Britain are increasingly alike. They're becoming increasingly indistinguishable from each other. And they all support the Brussels EU. Well, how about that? That's choice for you. That's democracy. We met with some of these survivors last year, in fact. As you can see, there's not as many of them left now. In not too many years, there'll be none of them left. So, one of the things we did last year, we actually filmed some interviews with them. The interviews are all in Polish, and at the moment, the only version we have available on our YouTube channel is in Polish. But what we're planning to do is to do English subtitles under these interviews. The film's about 20 minutes long, and we're going to do this, to be honest, we're going to do it subtitled in as many languages as we can. Because, you know, you can see by their ages that they're not going to be around forever. The ones that are alive now, pretty much, are the ones that were in Auschwitz and Birkenau as children or teenagers. But they're remarkable people. And what they are calling for now are for these principles in the constitution framework I described to you earlier, the Europe for the people, by the people. They're wanting to propel this to the global level. They're saying essentially that unless the world can be reorganised along proper democratic lines, the multinational corporate cartels that are seeking control over our lives will do whatever they have to do to achieve their aims. So this is one of the things that our Movement of Life project, which some of you may know about, is all about. We have a website, because to us, the bottom line here, which I'm sure the fact that you guys come here, you know, as often as you do, you know that it's about education. It's about each of us teaching each one of us. And we've essentially identified 6 areas that are the most important areas to these multinational corporate cartels. The area of health I've talked a lot about. I've got nothing really I can usefully add in the short time available tonight. The area of food, well, you know, we all know about genetically modified foods. And the fact is, you know, that Monsanto and these companies are interested in GM seeds because they can be patented. You can't patent, you know, an organic potato. You know, you cannot patent a naturally occurring potato. But if you can modify the molecules in the seed into a configuration that doesn't exist in nature, you can patent it. And that's why Monsanto and these companies are doing this. They want to own the food supply. So it's the same business model as the pharma industry, and of course not, you know, incoincidentally, some of the same companies that are involved in producing pharmaceuticals and chemicals are also involved in the GM industry. And the reason is it's the same model. It's the same patent model they're using. The area of water, well, our water supply already contains measurable amounts of pharmaceuticals. When you turn on your tap and, you know, fill your glass, your teapot, whatever, with water, there are measurable amounts of pharmaceuticals now turning up in the water supply all over the world. And of course the reason that is simple, because people are consuming them. You know, the residues get passed out in the urine, into the toilet, you know, flushed back through, and the water companies haven't got the technology, they're not implementing technology to filter this stuff out. All they do is basic cleansing and cleaning. So whether we like it or not, we're all consuming, you know, levels of pharmaceuticals of one sort or another. And then of course energy. I'm sure you must have had people coming here talking to you about alternative sources of energy. And you know, why are we still fixated and dependent upon oil? Well, I'll tell you what the key reason is, and it's one that people haven't really cottoned onto yet, is have you ever thought who's the biggest beneficiary of globalization? Well, I mean, it's the oil industry, because everything that's transported to be sold across borders and that has to be transported in vehicles. which involves oil, petrol, fuel. So every good that is transported, as part of what we now call globalization, the price includes a component for the transport. And the oil industry, of course, being the supplier of fuel for transport, benefits from this hugely. The oil industry is the biggest beneficiary from globalization. Knowledge is the fifth area, and of course, everything falls into this category. Knowledge includes education. We have, here in Britain, we're lucky to have, compared to many areas of the world that I've seen, a really decent educational system. And at least until you go to university, it's free. But, of course, as we now know, to give the example I've focused on most tonight, our doctors are not being taught about the basic principles, the crucial relationships between nutrition, health and disease. So, in so many areas, even our most eminent people are being lied to or misled or not given the entire understanding of what it is that they're going to be practicing. I've talked to medical students in several countries, and they will tell you, if you meet them yourselves, ask them, do they learn about nutrition in medical school? And the vast majority of the world gets little or no tuition in medical school relating to nutrition.
Yeah, half a day.
It varies across countries, but the point is that this cannot be by accident. If you look at the amount of knowledge that now exists in the area of nutrition, it cannot possibly be that they've just forgotten to implement this. In fact, if you talk to students, they'll tell you that they get the impression that it's almost not important, nutrition. It's not real medicine, And then finally, work. Employment. Have you ever thought about the fact that employment and unemployment are just different ways of making money? You see, if a large corporation thinks it can make more money from employing more people, that's what it does. But at any point, if it decides it can make more money by making people unemployed, that's what it does. Employment and unemployment are just opposite sides of the same coin. They're just other ways, opposite ways of making money. Health literacy. You see, the stuff that I'm telling you tonight, either I'm crazy and it's all wrong, or we've all been misled. I'd like to assume that we've all decided that there's something that we're missing out on here tonight and that we've been misled and not told about this. But health literacy is a different type of illiteracy to the definition of the word that we've all grown up with. You see, if you go back to the invention of the printing press was invented over 550 years ago in Germany. And within only a few decades, the printing of books was taking place in hundreds of cities all over Europe. But you know what? If you look at the statistics, even today, there are around 880 million people on the planet. That's about 12.3% of the global population who can't read or write. That's about 1 in 8 people on the planet can't read or write. Now, what that tells you is that even after the invention of technology that enabled the mass printing of books and the process of reading and writing accelerated dramatically after that took place, even 550 years later, 1 in 8 people hasn't yet benefited from that for one reason or another. So new inventions can sometimes take a long time to reach the masses, to reach all of us. And then there's the internet. I mean, living in Britain, living in Europe, living in the Western world, we get the impression that the internet is a global thing. In fact, we call it, don't we, the World Wide Web. Well, it's not. In fact, the latest figures that I could find related to June 2012, and the most reliable figures these, and in June 2012 it was estimated that about 2.4 billion people had access to the internet. That's about 34%. That means that 2 out of every 3 people on the planet haven't yet got access to the internet. And that's before you even get into the fact that if you talk to people in Africa, you'll find that the internet speeds, and reliability of the internet there is nothing like what we have here for most countries. So, whilst the invention of the internet, I've no doubt, will prove to be a watershed event in the education and the freeing of mankind, the fact is that majority of people, 66%, don't yet have access to it. 66% of the people on the planet haven't yet had the opportunity to expand their minds, to open themselves up to alternatives, like we've been talking about here tonight. And what does that have to do with health literacy? Well, because compared to regular literacy and the lack of an internet connection, health literacy is far more widespread. The vast majority of people on the planet do not have any idea about the close and crucial relationships between nutrition, health and disease. And as I've been saying many times tonight, this includes our doctors. And the reason for that is obvious. I talked about it earlier. It's that this information is essentially controlled by special interests who consider it forbidden knowledge. Because the widespread sharing of this information threatens everything for them. Absolutely everything. We have something, talking about health education and liberation from health literacy, we have something called our Body XQ project, and we spent a lot of money and a lot of time on this, and I can assure you there is no interactive graphic on the internet anywhere like this. It's at bodyxq.org. And what it does, it enables you to simulate in an incredibly lifelike way the workings of the heart, and alter parameters like sort of blood pressure and things and respiration, and also optimum nutrition and poor nutrition, and see how these affect the workings of the heart. You can cut away the heart and watch its internal workings while you alter these parameters. And you can even zoom in right down to the cellular level. It's a fantastic educational tool, especially for children, of course. We have another graphic that deals with cancer. And you can watch the development of cancer, you can watch the processes I talked about earlier in the section of my talk on cancer. Health education is the answer. And literally, the more people that can understand this, the more people who can learn about the things I've been talking about tonight, it's possible literally to save millions of lives. But those lives can only be saved if this information is shared. The bottom line for us is that the only way to bring a change to the healthcare systems of the world is if the people of the world together demand it. And we're not yet at the crucial tipping point whereby, change will occur. We're still at the education stage, and this is why I come round and with my colleagues and Dr. Rath do similar things to show people, tell people about what's available and how they've been misled. If we didn't believe it was possible to change these things, we wouldn't be doing this. We believe that a better future is possible. A better future is possible for not just Britain, but also for Europe and the world. But to get there, it depends on all of us playing our part. That's all I have to say for tonight. Thank you very, very much for listening.
Yeah, I mean...
He got struck off, and then his son became the President of America, then his other son became the President of America. The whole system's just, corrupt and flawed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the history of what led up to the Second World War and what took place during it that involves, all sorts of interest groups and politicians. And certainly, in many cases, either this information has either been not given to us or we've been misled, and I'm sure there's an awful lot more yet that we still don't know. But for sure, I think approach it with an open mind and look for the evidence.
Well, there's one more, sorry, can I say one more?
Yeah.
Merck was allegedly set up by Hitler's top scientists. They were released from prison early by the Rockefellers and brought over to America. And Merck was created our vaccine company, for God's sake, But these people, if they get found out, when they're in prison, they will not go to prison. So basically, the truth, in my opinion, is coming out, hence why we've got all these wars going on all over the world, because the truth cannot come out. How can the truth come out about all this?
Well, that's right. I mean, this is sort of...
Years and years and years.
That's right. That's right. So in a sense, you could argue that, what my colleagues and I are doing by producing that book is, you could argue if you want that we're helping them, because they're never going to admit it themselves. They're never going to tell you themselves. They've painted themselves into such a corner now that they cannot possibly get out. And so it really is literally up to us, because if we don't tell people, who's going to do it? As you say, they're not going to do it. The gentleman over here put his hand up in the middle of the talk, so let's, you next, sir.
Yeah, going back to Fritz Tamira, I think it was him, according to my research, who came up with our bite map for the gates of that.
I didn't know that. If true, it wouldn't surprise me, but I mean, again, it's...
The link with the oil cartels, IG Farben became equal shareholders in Rockefeller
Standard Oil.
And it was Nelson Rockefeller who got Fritz Tamir out of prison earlier. So
I didn't know that.
he into the US Vice President eventually.
Who's next?
IG Farben who actually manufactured the gas chambers.
Yes, it was an IG Farben company that produced the pellets, that's right, that were Zyklon B, that exterminated, that produced the gas for Auschwitz, that's right, yes.
I do have another point to make, and would it account for the lack of any nutritional education in medical schools, is that I believe 85% of the funding for medical school is provided by Big Pharma.
Of course.
Yes.
They have a vested interest in this system continuing. The lady behind in the yellow, I think, put her hand up. Well, I mean, if you think about it, the system of medicine that we have is encouraging us to believe that, the only answers to disease are synthetic, artificially created molecules, and that there's nothing in the natural world that could possibly be of help. I mean, that's pretty much the picture, isn't it? I mean, again, I used the word several times, I'll use it one more time. I mean, that's insane. It's not logical, it's not rational, The gentleman at the back there.
Does taking vitamin C contribute to the alkalinity acidity?
I don't know. We hear a lot about this alkalinity, sort of acidity issue. The only part that concerns us really is restoring the nutritional status, an optimum nutritional status. If that in the process results in, a higher, optimum alkalinity, well, great. It wouldn't surprise me if it does, but it's not, if it's true that cancer patients have a higher acidity, well, it's not the acidity itself that's the problem, but it's what's causing that, and that's the poor nutritional status, obviously, according to, what our researchers are finding. Anybody else? The man next to you. Yeah, well, I mean, in the Why Animals Don't Get Heart Attacks book, there's a whole section on high blood pressure, and quite rightly so, because this is one of the biggest killers. It's one of the biggest problems in the industrialized, so-called developed world today. Well, if you understood what I was saying, that at its root, are nutritional deficiencies. What you need to do is to resupply, your body and your arteries, because this is where the problem lies, with the correct nutrients. And those nutrients and the whole process is described in the book. And it's free online. It's not something you have to buy to obtain this knowledge. It's free. And you can download the chapters of that book for free and study it carefully. The man here, gentleman here. Well, yes. I mean, lysine is one of the 8 essential amino acids. So theoretically, at least, its supply, should be ubiquitous, in the food supply. The problem is, I suspect that, like, every other, micronutrients that our researchers have looked at, we are no longer getting sufficient supplies of lysine, And the reason lysine and the other 7 so-called essential amino acids are described as essential is because, theoretically, the body can make any of the other amino acids from those 8. But of course, if in your food supply you are no longer getting a sufficient supply of those 8, including lysine, that means, de facto, you cannot also make sufficient amounts of all of the others. So, it's not so much a matter of, because if you try to eat more of one thing containing something, you're also going to be eating less of something else. You know, what you need to try to do is to design an eating program, I guess, that, you know, includes a balance of all nutrients. And this is not easy, especially, as I described, in a world in which the overall levels of micronutrients in our food supply are diminishing. So it's not easy. The lady here again.
Does everyone know that zinc is really vitally important to help fix the vitamin C, being a water-soluble vitamin? It's flushed out so easy from our systems, but the zinc, taken at the same time, slows it all down, it sort of blocks it in for a while. So it's really, really useful.
Well, zinc is obviously a crucially important nutrient. But, you know, it's only one of many minerals, and, you know, magnesium as well. You know, part of the high blood pressure problem is probably due in part to widespread magnesium deficiency.
I just meant that it actually was slow.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit and stay on the record here that I'm not a biochemist. I'm not even a doctor or a scientist. You know, I'm just the executive director of our foundation. But that should tell you something, you see, because if even I can learn enough of this stuff to stand in front of you and tell you this, there's no reason why you can't learn it, you know, as well. You know, I used to think that it's important that we just had our doctors and scientists giving these talks, but then I realised no, because, as I say, if I can learn it, so can you. There's no reason why not. Anybody else before we finish?
Last question.
Last question. The lady here, gentleman here. Obviously, my eyesight is not what it used to be. I'll never live this down, will I? Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry.
I genuinely believe that with Europe, we are at a 1940 moment. That Britain is standing alone, as it has so often in the past. And if we can get us out of this, once the countries in Europe see that we've escaped,
Yeah.
Europe will just come tumbling down, because I really don't believe that even German people want to be in Europe. I believe they want to be Germans.
Iceland did it, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly.
What about Ireland? They didn't want to be in it.
Well, they were just bullied into...
Right, well, I think we can maybe carry on this discussion afterwards, but thank you very, very much. I've really enjoyed talking.